Hello, this is Tiger Slash II, and this glorious piece of Dark Eldar military hardware is a Voidraven Bomber. Not just any Voidraven Bomber either. This one's been customized using some extra bits I had laying around. If you go back a couple of years to my first video that I made for this channel, I was showing off a Dark Eldar army, really a large lot of models that I got secondhand from someone who was getting out of the army. And this was one of the major pieces that I picked up, along with the Tantalus. Now, the Voidraven Bomber is quite a bit rarer in lists and in the competitive scene compared to its cheaper cousin, the Razorwing Jetfighter. And today, I'm going to discuss a little bit about why I think that is, but also why I think the Voidraven Bomber doesn't really get a fair shake. As usual, we're going to break this down into three parts. First, we're going to look at the model, then we're going to talk about its rules, then we're going to talk about tactics. First, the model. Admittedly, I can't really say much about the model as like a kit because this model came to me mostly assembled. Some assembly required, but not a lot, and some pieces were missing. For instance, the astute among you might notice that the weapon options are not what actually comes in the Voidraven Bomber kit. These are actually off a Crimson Hunter kit because this model didn't come with any weapons except the missile pods underneath. These guys here. It came with a bomb, but no bomb bracket. So that's not really a problem for me because I planned on doing this anyway. The bomb is magnetized. I didn't bother covering the magnet because when it's on the plane you can't even tell. Other than that, I don't think any pieces were missing. All the internal bits are there, as you can see. The model has a canopy in which there is a dude who very much resembles kind of a ship in a bottle. Now, the one thing I will say that's weird is this detail right here. This is on the outside. However, these markings here, if I can get this thing to focus correctly, these markings for the sights, those are on the inside of the plastic. So once this is assembled, you can't paint this part. You can only paint the outside. So this is definitely a paint-as-you-go kind of plane, which makes buying it secondhand a bit more iffy. In my case, I liked the model. I figured I'd build it, and it's quite a bit bigger than you'd expect. Like most times, especially this for me, it was the Torox that did this. The model, once you have it assembled and everything's put together, it looks so much smaller than what it looks like on the box. This is exactly what you get on the package. It looks like a big model. You're getting a big model. This used to be the Dark Eldar centerpiece, and still pretty much is. I would actually say it's almost too big compared to... For me personally, I have an issue with models in 40K constantly getting bigger. I feel like it's not in the proportion of the game, at least not as it was originally intended to be played. For instance, here I have an old 25mm Space Marine, and it's just not in proportion. Let's take a look at it against, say, the Avatar of Cain. I'm gonna have to get this down into Gorilla Vision here, because this plane is so big, it actually makes it so that my normal camera rig doesn't work. But for comparison, let's see how we can do this here. No, that just about does it, I guess. Or that. This thing is gargantuan. That being said, I'm not going to knock points off just because I personally don't like the larger aesthetic of the model. It is actually a very well detailed model and fits in well with the whole Dark Eldar line, of course. So let's talk about the technical bits. The Voidraven Bomber is a toughness 6 flyer with 12 wounds that, in its full bracket, can move between 20 inches and 60 inches a turn plus advance. It has the usual 4-up and 5-up invulnerable save and can be taken either Cabals or Witch Cults. The supersonic rule applies, and the ubiquitous -1 to hit against flyers adds a little extra durability to the platform. For the most part, the Voidraven Bomber is a heavy weapons platform with a choice between 2 missile profiles, unlike the 3 the Razorwing Jetfighter has, and the 2 main gun options are Dark Sides and Void Lances. Void Lances are, for all intents and purposes, Dark Lances, but at Strength 9 instead of Strength 8, while Dark Sides are 24-inch D3 shots at strength 8 that are -4 AP and do D3 damage apiece. Finally, as is illustrated on the model itself, the Voidraven Bomber has its party piece, the Void Bomb, or Void Mine, which has its own special rules. The Void Mine is not actually a weapon so much as it is a special rule. It is dropped once per game in the movement phase when the flyer flies over an enemy unit. You can choose to drop it. You roll a d6 for each enemy model in the unit you flew over, capping at 10d6. If you flew over a monster or a vehicle, you instead roll 3d6 for each model in the unit. For every roll of a 3-up, you inflict a mortal wound on the unit. This mortal wound drop tends to be what makes or breaks the effectiveness of the Voidraven Bomber, and is usually what your opponents will know of, if anything, about the unit. For this reason, Voidraven Bombers are frequently the turn 1 target of choice for many armies. So on to the tactical portion. Why do people not run these as often as Razorwing Jetfighters, and do they have a place in a Dark Eldar army? In my opinion, yes they do. Razorwing Jetfighters are the flyer of choice typically because of their access to disintegrator cannons. The Jetfighters come in only slightly more expensive than Ravagers, and considering the variety of armaments they have, it makes them roughly equivalent in terms of shooting, and they're more durable with the -1 to hit from being a flyer. Voidravens, on the other hand, have only 2 heavy weapon options, and they aren't as point efficient, and, although the platform is hardier, the damage output is typically lower. Compounding this is the fact the Voidraven must pay extra for its missiles. However, they're not that expensive and open up a 3rd heavy weapon option. I recommend taking them whenever you're taking a Voidraven Bomber. The real value of the Bomber comes from proper application of its Void Mine. Being able to throw up to 10 mortal wounds out of the gate can change the shape of a game. You can destroy an enemy elite infantry that wasn't held in deep strike. You can use this to clear enemy chaff out of the way for a turn 1 charge. You can use this to clear an objective, and is especially good against very high-priced 1-wound models such as Dark Reapers, Genestealers, Harlequin troops, etc. Obviously, experienced opponents are going to know this and will attempt to either gun it down in turn 1 or deploy accordingly. Remember, you've got to fly over the model with your base. Therefore, even though you can move pretty much across the board, if your opponent boxes their very important infantry up against walls and against terrain, it's going to be hard to fly over it if you're going up against a board edge. You can easily use the Voidraven Bomber as a distraction Carnifex by buffing it to -2 to hit and letting that invulnerable save soak some of the wounds. Typically, when I run this unit, one of 2 things happens. The opponents either shoot it down turn 1, in which case they waste all of their shooting on 1 bomber, or they completely ignore it and it's allowed to run around carte blanche. But let's talk about damage output for a minute. The Dark Side is a lower strength but has a higher variance of damage. The Void Lance, however, is strength 9, so even though its variance is lower, and even though the average is slightly lower than the Dark Side, it's going to be able to wound more reliably against toughness 8 targets, and considering how prevalent knights are in the current meta, the Void Lance is typically what I equip it with. This means it's basically shooting 2 Dark Lance shots that'll wound a knight on a 3. Not the best thing in the world, but it's better than nothing. Plus, when you factor in that you have a command point reroll that you can use on that damage chart, if one of those goes through and actually makes it past the invul save, you're going to do a good chunk of damage. In my opinion, though, unless you're running against knights, it's best to take the Dark Sides. The unit is maneuverable enough that you're always going to be in range of something useful to shoot at, and really, you're not going to lose that much with the D3 damage considering how many shots you're going to be throwing. The end result is that this unit is about 30 points more expensive than the Razorwing Jetfighter, marginally tougher, and with specialized armaments that can put out a little less firepower in exchange for being better at wounding specific targets. Assuming the firepower discrepancy trades evenly with the 2 extra wounds, the question really comes down to one thing. That is, can you make up those 30 extra points with tactical use of the Void Mine? This is not something that I can answer. This is something that is up to every general out there, and this should be a good indication as to why this isn't brought in tournament lists very often. Application of the Void Mine is really not just general, but also army dependent. It depends what you're going against, and depends what you have and what you're capable of getting out of this unit. I always include it in my lists because I think the tactical flexibility of being able to dump up to 10 mortal wounds in a flyover pass is really, really good. I think it's worth the extra 30 points that it would cost over having a Razorwing Jetfighter. A lot of people don't. Personally, I've seen this thing pull some miracles off, and I've seen it be completely wasted. Either one of those is an option. It's really up to you. It's up to the opponent and how they deploy their army. It depends what kind of army they have. It depends what your strategy is, what kind of game type it is. For an all-comers, like I said, I almost always include them because I just really like the idea of being able to just say, you know what, that's a very nice bunch of Plague Marines you got there, or a very nice bunch of Noise Marines you got there. Let me just throw 7 mortal wounds on there. It's handy. It gets you out of a lot of sticky situations. However, perhaps that's not your cup of tea. Perhaps you're more of a sit back and shoot them kind of playstyle where you don't want this thing getting up close and personal with enemy units. Even though it is a flyer, that is still a danger, especially if there's a lot of heavy weapons or units with fly nearby. That's typically what I will do, is I will turn one, run it up the board, and sort of let the opponent have their way with it. They've got a flyer in their back line. What are they going to do? And usually it draws fire away from the other advancing models, such as Talos, Razorwing, Phlox, units of Coblite, Warriors, etc. So yeah, would I recommend it? Depends on your playstyle. If you like being really offensive, if you push really hard, then I would say yes, this is definitely a good unit to include because it's going to automatically, right out of the gate, as soon as it hits the opponent's line, it's going to do some damage. If you've got the kind of playstyle where you like to hang back with a gun line or perhaps a lot of gunboats and just sort of kite your army or kite your opponent's army around, I would say this is probably not the flyer for you. I would go with the Razorwing Jetfighter. It's much more effective at 36-inch range. It likes to stay there. This one, at least for one turn, does not. But could it be competitive? Could it be used in competitive lists? Absolutely. The application for that bomb is huge, and it's not terrible at fighting high toughness units. And the addition of the missiles gives it a little extra flexibility. So even once that bomb drops, yeah, it's mostly just done its job, but at the same time, it's still a nuisance. It can make a nuisance of itself. So yeah, that's what I think of the Voidraven Bomber. A unit I feel is severely underrated with a lot of tactical depth for those willing to give it a try.